Hello and welcome to the first in a series of short films about the women that are commemorated on the Dundee Women's Trail. The First Lady is Agnes Husband, and she was one of the first female councillors in Dundee. And she worked long and conscientiously to improve the lives of Dundee's poor, and she also petitioned for better education. In addition to her counselling role, she was a suffragette and quite a feisty suffragette. She was a member of the more militant parts of the suffragette movement. Um, by the time she was 74, she had been awarded the Freedom of the City, so her work had been recognised with that honour. And her plaque is on the City Chambers building in the centre of Dundee in the city square. And sometimes when you're involved in work like this, there are spin offs. So, Mary Henderson, who wrote the book for the Women's Trail and did all the research about the women, um, I was with Mary when she was trying to track down a portrait of Agnes Husband, and we eventually found it in the archive of McManus Gallery. And the spin off was that that portrait was then moved into the city chambers and is now hanging there. So if you are ever in the city chambers in Dundee, look out for it and you'll see Agnes Husband, not exactly in the flesh, but on a painting. And if you aren't able to do that, then you can see the portrait on our website. And I often think that you can admire people in the past, you can be inspired by them, and all the amazing things that they perhaps achieved. But I wonder sometimes what it would be like if you met them now. And with Agnes' husband, I just think I'm never sure quite how I would take to her, because I think she looks quite formidable in her portrait, and I think I would either be absolutely terrified of her or I would hero worship her. So it's a bit of a tricky one. It'd be interesting to see what you think when you have a look at her. However, she certainly worked tirelessly to improve the lives of other people. The second plaque on the trail is for Mariote Ker, who was the first female Burgess in Dundee. She was made Burgess at the request of the King, which is King James V. And we don't know why, but Burgesses had commercial advantages. They had monopolies when it came to the production of things like beer and bread and clothing. And it's very likely that she was quite wealthy and she may have lent the king money or given him money. But certainly she was the first woman to become a Burgess, and there wasn't another female Burgess for 360 years later, until 360 years later. So she was certainly a record breaker in that respect. And her plaque is on Gardine's land in Dundee, which, if you don't know, it's a kind of orangey coloured building. And the reason it's there is because that's the only building in the centre of town that is of her kind of time frame. So most of the buildings, there's not that many really old buildings in Dundee. And so Gardine's land was very appropriate for her plaque, plus the fact that the ceremony to make her a Burgess would probably have taken place at the toll booth, which would have again have been in the city centre or at the bottom of Reform Street. So yeah, somebody that we don't really know a huge amount about, but the fact that we do know about her at all is really rather wonderful. Plaque number 3 is for an anonymous maidservant. It actually commemorates a group of maidservants who came together to try and form a trade union to improve their working conditions. And the reason that the plaque says it's for an anonymous maidservant is that these people had to keep their identity secret because they would have lost their jobs. Now, they met together in the Thistle Hall in Union Street, and at first, some journalists actually came to their meetings and reported about their agitation, and news spread throughout the city, but also way beyond. Apparently, there was reports in America about what they were trying to do, which must have sent some shockwaves through some of the people who could employ maidservants. And unfortunately, after a wee while, the journalists started to report in a slightly different way. The maidservants felt that they were kind of taking the mickey a little bit out of them, so they banned the journalists from the meetings. And of course, as soon as they did that, then actually they cut off their kind of communication, and the movement eventually frizzled out. And it wasn't until about 50 years later that the first union started to be formed, and the improvements that these original women had agitated for came into effect. So it's difficult to know whether they made any really significant difference at the time, but they do reflect that very strong female character that Dundee still has to this day. Our fourth plaque is for Fanny Wright, and you can find it at 136 Nethergate. She was the daughter of an ardent Republican, and she grew up to be a very outspoken free thinker, and she believed in free love. She didn't believe in organised religion. She believed in the abolition of slavery. And when she was 23, she had read about America, but she didn't actually know if it actually existed, and had to look it up on a map. But off she went when she was 23 with her sister, off to America. And when she was there, she did a lot of writing, and she also toured and gave lectures. Now you can imagine she's giving these lectures about her beliefs, which were very contradictory probably to what most people were thinking at the time. And she also tried to put her money where her mouth was. She set up a farm in Memphis, Tennessee, to where she wanted to have slaves liberated, and they would work on the farm. But there really wasn't the infrastructure to support what she was trying to do, and the project wasn't really a success. So, she was somebody who was way ahead of her time. Slavery wasn't abolished until about 10 years after she died. So, a real free thinking, independent woman who very much deserves her plaque. Our fifth plaque is for Margaret Fenwick, who was a redoubtable mill worker and trade unionist from the age of 15. Um, while she was bringing up her children, she became the first female General Secretary of a British trade union, and she fought hard for better, not just pay, but really for better health and safety, better conditions within the mills as well. And she worked on into her 60s as a Justice of the Peace, and in 1973 she was awarded an MBE. Now, sometimes we do walks around the trail. We take groups out for walks around, guided walks around the city centre trail. And on one occasion, when I was doing the walks, I was talking about Margaret Fenwick because she's obviously within living memory, and there are sometimes people who do know her or have known her that are actually in amongst this sort of audience. And on one occasion, I was talking about her, and I mentioned that apparently she was well known for always having a cigarette, and and being quite fierce. But one of the people in the group on this occasion was actually a member of her family, and they said that what they remembered most was it was about her studying, and I thought, that was really interesting because she must have had to do a huge amount of work, not just in her working day, but all her research and getting her arguments prepared, and studying away at legislation, all sorts of things in order to be able to fight her corner. And it was lovely to get that little personal insight that was a little bit different from the public persona. But she certainly represents the women of Dundee very, very, very well.